What you are about to hear transcends the history of a mere car. It is a cold dissection of human failure within the American industrial giant, the Ford Motor Company. It is the moment when engineering, which should have saved lives, was intentionally hijacked by corporate greed. The Ford Pinto. A subcompact launched in 1971, promising the freedom of the road with economy at the pump. But in the hands of Ford executives, it became something far more sinister, a weapon in flames, the result of a frigid calculation, an internal document that placed a definitive price tag on every human life. This is the history of the Ford Pinto Scandal, the story of how the company not only knew about a deadly design flaw, but decided that paying out settlements for deaths and injuries would be more profitable than fixing the vehicle. Today, on Remember That Car, we dive deep into the engineering of risk. To understand the Pinto's failure, you must first understand the intense pressure that created it. By the late 1960s, Detroit was in a state of panic. Light, economical import cars, such as the Toyota Corolla, the Datsun 510, and the Volkswagen Beetle, were rapidly stealing market share from American manufacturers. Ford responded with an urgency bordering on the military. Lee Iacocca, then a vice president at Ford, imposed rigid and infamous goals. The new American subcompact had to weigh less than 2,000 pounds and cost less than $2,000. And the deadline, the factor that would prove to be the central villain in this case, was brutal. 25 months from concept to dealership. For the American automotive industry at the time, this was a development timeline cut in half from the usual standard. Decisions were made parallel to the tooling production, prematurely freezing the basic design. Historical records are clear. Decisions that threatened the schedule were discouraged. In executive boardrooms and in engineering forums decades later, the discussion persists. Was the fault with the engineer who yielded or the manager who imposed? Accounts from the era are unambiguous. Iacocca, a legendary yet ruthless executive, had made the word safety taboo in certain discussions. When engineers raised concerns that might cause a delay or increase costs, the instruction was to go back and read the product objectives. One engineer who worked on similar projects from that era summarized the situation with chilling clarity. Engineers are the voice of reason, but if management is blinded by a cost number and a deadline, reason is the first thing thrown out the window. The Pinto was a product of extreme goal setting, and it was under this tyranny of cost and schedule that the fatal design flaw was cemented. The company rushed into the subcompact market, cutting costs which eliminated the crucial time needed for necessary testing, iterations, and reinforcements. The public initially embraced the Pinto as an American option for a light, cheap car, but that was before the terrifying reports of fire-related rear-end collisions began to surface. The engineering team, pressured to maximize passenger space, enlarge the trunk, and above all, keep weight and cost minimal, made the fatal decisions. The fuel tank was positioned behind the rear axle, with a perilous proximity to the sheet metal, less than 10 inches of crush space. But here lies one of the most common questions that arise online about this case. Was the Pinto really worse than other cars of that era? And the answer is complex and crucial to the drama that unfolded. It is absolutely true that in the 60s and 70s, most American cars had the fuel tank located near or behind the rear axle. This was an accepted standard by American engineering at the time. The AMC Gremlin, the Chevrolet Vega, and even Ford's beloved Mustang suffered from similar vulnerabilities. This is a fact that Ford's defenders use even today to mitigate the myth. But the Pinto had a unique combination of factors that made it singularly prone to ignition: turning it into a ticking firebomb on wheels. Firstly, there was the exact location of the tank. It was squeezed between the rear axle and the rear bumper, in a reduced space, such that a rear impact could easily compress it. Secondly, and more perversely, the exposed differential and its bolts. The pointed bolts of the rear axle differential were aimed forward, acting like actual can openers in a collision, ready to pierce the tank under compression. And finally, the lack of reinforcement or tank protection. There were no baffles, rubber linings, or safety bladders, simple protections that could have prevented or reduced fuel leakage. One of the pre-production crash tests conducted in 1970, before the first Pinto was ever sold, confirmed the catastrophic failure. In rear collisions at only 20 miles per hour, the tank ruptured, fuel leaked, and the car consistently burst into flames. The engineers, with their technical reason, had simple and cheap solutions, budgeted between $5 and $11 per car, such as a protective shield or a rubber liner. Any of these corrections would have saved dozens, perhaps hundreds, of lives or serious injuries. However, the car was already being manufactured. The assembly lines were running at full capacity, and the cost of retooling the entire process seemed, in the management's view, too high. Ford had to decide between altering now or adopting later or never, and they reached for the calculator. The technical discussion shows that while the Pinto had atypical risk in one specific type of collision, low to moderate rear impact, in terms of fatality rate per mile driven, it was actually in the average range for its subcompact class. But that statistic never mattered to the public. What mattered was the severe mode of failure, the spreading fire, and the terrifying image of the exploding car. Ford's decision not to fix the car was not an accident. It was a cold calculation, documented in a 25-page report that came to be known as the Pinto Memo, one of the most infamous documents in American corporate history. What is even more shocking about this memo is its utilitarian context. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, was proposing new safety standards for rear collisions. To prepare, Ford conducted a cost-benefit analysis using monetary values approved by the regulatory agency itself to determine if implementing the $11 safety measure was financially worthwhile. In the memo, Ford estimated what would happen if the defect was not corrected. They projected 180 deaths and 180 serious injuries attributable to Pinto-related fires. Estimated value of a human life, according to NHTSA in 1972, $200,000. Estimated value of a serious injury, $67,000. The total estimated cost of settlements and injuries was $49.5 million. In contrast, the cost of installing the $11 part on all 12.5 million vehicles in the group, including the Pinto and related models, was estimated at $137.5 million. The document concluded, in its chilling logic, not correcting was $87 million cheaper than correcting. There was no public internal ethical debate or clear moral values in this calculation. There was no "what is the value of a life" in corporate language. There was only the brutal math that chose profits over lives, and that is why the Pinto case stands out above any other. It was not just the flaw, but the documented intent to ignore the flaw that turned it into a scandal. In the American engineering and business ethics community, this distinction is always remembered, and the discussion is still alive today. As one user in an engineering forum on Reddit summed up the sentiment, their biggest mistake wasn't making the calculation. Cost-benefit analysis is a common tool. Their biggest mistake was documenting the conclusion that placed profit above life. That transformed a design flaw into criminal negligence. Despite all the technical nuances, the Pinto memo became an irrefutable symbol. It transformed into a dividing moment in automotive regulation and the debate on corporate ethics. The memo remained hidden until Mother Jones magazine obtained it in 1977, publishing the article Pinto Madness and generating a wave of indignation that swept across the U.S. It was the proof of malice that the victim's lawyers, such as those representing the severely burned survivor Richard Grimshaw, victim of a 1972 crash, needed. The Grimshaw case resulted in one of the largest punitive damage awards in history up to that time. Although the judge later reduced the punitive amount to $3.5 million, the jury had originally awarded $125 million in punitive damages, and the 1981 appellate decision confirmed Ford's guilt for negligent design. But the definitive and most shocking turning point came in 1978 in Elkhart County, Indiana. 3 teenagers died when their 1973 Pinto was rear-ended, caught fire, and the girls were incinerated. Ford was indicted for reckless homicide. This was the first criminal trial in American history against a corporation for a defective product. Although Ford was acquitted by the jury in 1980, mainly due to the legal difficulty of proving criminal intent beyond a reasonable doubt, the precedent was set. The government and the public no longer saw Ford as a victim of bad publicity, but as a potential defendant for crimes against public safety. On June 9, 1978, Ford, under unsustainable pressure, announced the recall of 1.5 million Pintos and related models. They finally installed the $11 protection that their engineers had suggested years earlier. It was a disaster for both reputation and finances. The message to the industry and the public was clear. Deliberate negligence, especially when documented, can cost not only lives but the trust and survival of a brand. The cold calculation of the memo proved to be catastrophically wrong in the long run. The Pinto is a car that lives in the shadow of myth and truth. The truth, as engineering analysis confirmed, is that in terms of fatalities per mile driven, it was not the most deadly car on the roads. Studies indicate it was within the average range for its subcompact class. But what makes the Pinto the black legend of American engineering is the proof of deliberate intent, the conscious choice, documented for all time to accept the risk. The Pinto taught us that in a desperate race for profits, engineering can be corrupted, and that transparency is the only true shield between the corporation and the consumer. The Pinto showed us the engineering that led to death. But what happens when engineers create something so complex, so good, and so expensive that they sink the very company that created it? That is our next story here on Remember That Car. If you love car stories with technical depth, corporate conspiracy, and high drama, subscribe now to the channel and hit the notification bell. This channel is built on exposing automotive secrets, and you will not want to miss the next case. Comment below. Was Lee Iacocca, who demanded the tight deadline, the primary culprit, or does the error lie only with the employee who documented the lost memo? Where does the responsibility in this tragedy truly reside? Your comment and like are crucial for us to continue this series. Thank you for joining us on the journey to remember the cars and the secrets they carried. Until the next Engineering of Risk.